Alright, YouTube, what's going on? Denonu here, the man with the biggest and the most blackest privilege on YouTube. And in this video here, since you guys like my last anime talk video, I see that it got a lot of views. I wasn't expecting that. Normally my videos get small amount of views, so I figured, why not do another one, episode this week? Why not? Because I don't have anime's not running out anytime soon. So so in this one here, we're going to be talking about another recent anime that really impressed me. This anime is going to be called Gate. It has a Japanese name too. I'm not even going to try to butcher it. It's one of those weird ones. But I'll put a link down in the description to an anime site that'll have like the synopsis, when it came out, all of that good stuff. But it came out in 2015. And I found this anime. I was just doing an internet search, basically just to give you guys a little bit of backstory about how I found it. I work from home. I do IT tech support, work for a company, and we take some calls, but we don't take a lot of calls. So sometimes in between calls, I watch movies, Netflix, anime, what have you, right? So I was looking for a new anime to watch. And one of the genres that I kind of teeter towards, besides the mature, action-oriented shonen type stuff, is either romantic comedy animes, kind of like what are they called? Harem animes. And probably one I'm gonna talk about later in a future video, Tenchi Muyo. That's like my favorite. Has my waifu of choice in it, but I was looking up for a video for that, right? Or not a video, but a new anime for that. But I got off of that and started searching up military animes. And that's a genre of book, that I like to read. I like to read military thrillers, assassination novels, things like that, right? So I'm knowledgeable about at least some of the material, weapons, the military, all that kind of sort of stuff. I've never served in the military myself, but that's a genre that's always interested me, even in real life. Like, I'm a fan of actual sniping. So sniping in video games, I hate the way they butchered it most of the time. But I was looking for a new anime, jumped onto the military genre, came across this anime called Gate, and I read the description. The description didn't stand out to me in any kind of way. It was just pretty much, this magical gate opens up into Japan. You have the Japanese military fighting, dragons and magical creatures and elves and all this shit, right? So I read it. I was like, it don't sound like anything really important, But I am so happy I gave it a shot. Like, I seen the first episode, and I can't name something about the anime that really hooked me. I can name later on, like once I got like maybe a few episodes into it, I could tell you what hooked me. But when I first sat down and seen it, nothing really hooked me about it. But it was just something that kept my interest. Maybe it was the main character, because the main character, he's like this lazy otaku type guy, and I was like, okay, that's me in general, as most people who watch anime who probably fit the stereotype. But anyway, he's this guy, and his job is he's a part of the Japanese SDF, the Self-Defense Force. And basically the storyline, without getting too in-depth as far as what's going on, basically modern day Tokyo, this magical portal opens up, in the middle of like, what do they call, I want to say that one intersection you see in Japanese anime all the time, something like that, right? This portal opens up, and these demonic creatures just start pouring out, like goblins and orcs and all this kind of shit, right? And they just start killing people, just anybody that they can see. Like, this whole magical army of these fantasy creatures just pour out, and they just start killing people. Now, people don't know what's going on. People are running all around, watching their loved ones get killed. They're just trying to get away because they don't know how to deal with it. So eventually, the military rolls in. The self-defense force rolls in. The main character happens to be there, and he runs, and he's like one of the dudes who sees something going on, and he tries to direct the civilians to go to specific areas, or to direct the police and the military to what's going on, because they're just rolling up like, we don't know what's going on. We just know something's happening. We see a lot of people running, so they don't know how to deal with the situation. So They roll up there, and eventually, through coordination and everything, they eventually pushed back this enemy force into this portal. And I think I want to say, does the portal close? I don't remember if the portal closes or not. I want to say it doesn't. So like it stays open. So once they pushed everybody back, I want to say like either the portal closes and it reopens, but later on, the portal is still there, and they send a battalion of troops because they like, look, we want to know who these invaders were. We want to know what's beyond this portal. But basically, what happens is they send a battalion of troops or a platoon. I can't remember which was which, but they send like a platoon, a battalion through this portal. And we basically, and that's probably why I love it so much. They basically go into this fantasy dimension. It's like this whole nother world that has elves, humans, orcs, goblins, dragons, magic, all of this shit, right? It's basically they go to Fantasyland. And when they get there, they do just like what we do now. They make a FOB. They put up defenses. They bring in the tanks, you know, like the artillery, and they just post up shop, right? And this anime, I swear to God, it's not a comedy. I mean, I don't think it is, but some of the stuff in the anime was so funny, or at least to me. Because what they basically do is they go into this Fantasyland, make a FOB, right? A forward operating base, for those of you who don't know. And they post up shop. Now, they're waiting. The reason why they went in there is because they want to know they want to know their enemy. So they want to know who's attacking them, what's going on. So they send troops over there, and they basically wait. They get their defensive ready, and they wait. Now, the troops on the other side, it's Fantasyland, like I told you, right? So it's magic, it's medieval, swords and shields. That's the technology they're used to dealing with. So they have their scouts seeing the Japanese self-defense force post up shop. So they're like, oh, what are these metal beasts? What are the, because they're expecting people on horseback with swords and shields and medieval armor, right? They don't know what's going on. So they're like, oh, okay, well, obviously it's an enemy force. Let's go attack it, right? Now, later on, you find out that they have their reasons for doing this, right? But early on, you don't know none of that as the viewer. You just see two armies fighting, right? It turns out, I want to say later on in the anime, that the spot that portal opened up on the Fantasyland side of things, I want to say is like some kind of religious area. It's like important because the army that the Japanese people are facing, it's like a coalition. Maybe that's the wrong word, but it's like a grouping together of like 3 or 4 different countries' armies. It's not just like one enemy country that they're fighting. It's like a group of them, and it's like 50,000 troops strong, right? They think that they got something, right? So, so the guy who's leading these coalition of troops, he sends them all to fight the Japanese Defense Force, at least part of them, right? Like his first wave, as it were. And mind you, they have no idea what they're dealing with. So they roll up in there thinking that the Japanese self-defense force is like, oh, they weak, they just getting there, they probably sleep. They go in like the middle of the night, YouTube, right? But what they don't realize is that, and this is the whole basis behind the anime, is you have modern day military tactics, and that's probably why I love it so much, versus ancient tactical military warfare. Right? So it's basically modern versus medieval. That's the concept behind it. That and something I'll get into later where they kind of glorify the Japanese military, but I'll touch on that later. So basically they go in with this first wave of troops and they just get demolished, YouTube. Like, they thought they was going in nice, going into the cover of darkness, but the Japanese self-defense force, they had people lined up scouting with thermal goggles, so they seen them coming from like a long way off, started throwing artillery shells their way, took out their whole first wave in like 5 minutes. It was something like 20,000 troops, something like that, right? And the commander of this other military of this Fantasyland, coalition is like, I mean, I don't use this word ever, but he was flabbergasted. And he just did not know what to do. He like they just didn't know what was going on. They was wondering where all this fire and noise was coming from the artillery shells that was blowing up. They was seeing their people die left and right, and they hit them with the artillery shells, and then later, like once they got a little bit closer, they opened up with like tanks, assault rifles, and just, infantry stuff, right? But they basically, the Japanese self-defense force, they never made it to them, so they never had to leave that position. They just mowed them all down, right, with bullets and stuff. And eventually, it gets to a point where they basically wipe out this enemy coalition so much that they have to pull back because they don't have the troops to fight anymore. It's that bad. Like the main military guy who was leading them, he got like his arm and his legs blown off, something like that, with an artillery shell. They don't know how to deal with it, so they basically just leave them alone. That's the only thing that they do. They're like, you know what? We can't fight them. They got some badass weapons. We don't know what the hell they are, so we're just gonna leave them alone and don't go up on the top of that hill. So that's basically what they did, and they passed the word around to all the other countries that I forget the nickname that they called the Japanese people. It was something like Green Dragons or something. It was something that they took from I want to say like because they had tanks and helicopters and stuff like that, right? And they gave them a nickname. I forget what it was, but they gave them a nickname, and it was like, look, you know what? Don't go over there and mess with the green people. I think that's what they called them. It was something because everybody had on like green camo and stuff like that. So it was either something like the green people or something simple, right? So they was like, yeah, don't go over there and mess with those green people. Like, we don't know what they want, but we don't want to fight them. And basically, what they do is they basically make a FOB. They make a base, and from this base, since the Japanese people are just completely in the dark with why they were attacked, they can't talk to nobody in this fantasy land. They speak a whole separate language. So they can't speak to nobody. They don't know what's going on. So once they set up this base, they basically start scouting to the nearby countries and everything. And they take the main character, him and a few other people or whatever, and they basically go in this fantasy land, and they basically go around to other countries. And basically the premise of, I guess this anime is, it didn't have like an overarching plot, There was no like, there was a plot there. I'm not saying it went episode by episode with no plot, but there wasn't no, like in most animes you have like a main antagonist who's the bad guy who kidnaps somebody or is trying to take over the world, something, right? This anime didn't have none of that. It was a whole lot of, and another reason why I kind of liked it was very political. A lot of animes don't do politics very well when it comes to what they do. I can name probably like 3 or 4 animes that I really liked because they were political. Probably another anime that this kind of reminded me of, and this is probably another anime I'm going to throw in another anime talk video, was 12 Kingdoms. Love that anime. But that was, again, a bunch of countries, really, really political. But that had its own stuff. But it was more about the balance between the Japanese people and the self-defense force dealing with this new fantasy world, and the people that lived in this fantasy world dealing with something that they just had no concept of. And every once in a while they had like little situations where like the first country that the Japanese people went to, right? Because I want to say like they had I think they scouted out, like after that main battle they didn't know what to do. They were like, well, we can hold this position. So they sent back word to their commanders over in Japan through the portal, and then they were like, okay, well, we got to get the lay of the land. We have to talk to somebody. So they went to the main character, scouted out, and he took like a patrol of Humvees to this country, right? Now this other country, I think they were a part of the coalition, but the main country, let's say if you have one country, there was a bunch of cities in this country, and one of the countries was led by this one female woman, and she was like on the outskirts of the country, so they got the news of like, oh, don't mess with these green people, right? But she didn't know why. So when they came rolling up to her door, she was like, oh shit, they're gonna invade me. They're gonna invade my city. I don't know what to do. We can't defend against them. That was her first thought, because why would they be there, right? But the Japanese people were like, hey, look, we just want to know what's going on. I mean, we can't, so they was trying to basically talk to her, and she, under under fear, she let them come in, and they tried to talk to her and stuff because she didn't want them to invade. So she was playing the queen as far as like, okay, let me cater to them and then see what they want. But she couldn't talk to them. But eventually, I want to say, I forget exactly how, but they learned how to communicate a little bit. And they eventually leave. And throughout the anime, they have like little hints of like things that happen that kind of create for hilarious events. Like, meaning they came there, they talked to the queen, right? And the queen pretty much realized, like, okay, they're here. They don't know how they got here. Yeah, they may have some weird technology that we have no concept of, but they're not invading. They're here peacefully. So she talks to them. She gives them the lay of the land or whatever. They exchange knowledge. And when they go to leave, I want to say like let's say that queen's, her town's like elite guard are like on the way back to the city from like a mission. And they end up confronting, the Japanese people. And the Japanese people, they're just trying to pass by, but they block the road and they have dialogue. Now, mind you, they can't really communicate with each other, right? So the main character tells his team, like, look, whatever happens, don't open up on them. Don't shoot them. Just let it go. Right? Because he knows that they could obviously just kill him anytime that they want. But he's trying not to start like an international incident, so to speak, right? And you have a lot of that going throughout the anime. And basically what happens is, I want to say, they try to, he tries to communicate with the person who's talking to him. She's telling him like, oh, don't you know who we are? Why aren't you kneeling? Or something like that, right? And he doesn't understand her. So he's like, hey, how you doing? We're from so-and-so. What's going on? He's just trying to make conversation. And I want to say, since they can't communicate, the woman that he's speaking to thinks he's like mouthing off to her. And she like slaps him or like knocks him down, something. I remember she does something to him. And everybody on the Japanese military side, they just post up and pull up the guns like like they trying to shoot her, and he holds up his hand like. But they eventually kidnap him. And they basically take him back to the city that they came from, right? And he tells his military like, look, don't worry about it. Just go on, go back to base. Let our people know what happened. It's not that big a deal. So they kidnap him, drag him by horseback all the way back to the city, right? And that's what I was saying earlier. You have a lot of comedy in this anime, but it's not like a comedy anime, if that makes sense. So they drag him back to the city, right? The queen, who they just got finished talking to, sees that they dragged him back, and their leader of this elite guard is like, oh, we caught this guy. He was mouthing off to us, yada, yada, yada. We don't know who he is, but we're going to mess him up, right? And the queen is like, what the fuck are you doing? Do you not know who he's with? And she's like, oh my God, they're going to come back and invade us. And she's like, oh my God, So she, jumped, bowed to him and was like, well, we are so sorry for kidnapping you. We didn't know. It's, like she was like prostrating herself as low as she could possibly be to apologize for what her people did, right? Because she doesn't want them to come back and invade. And the guy was like, no, like, it's cool. Like, and she kind of put him up for the night, where she gave him like this nice bedroom, had handmaidens waiting on his every whim and all this kind of sort of stuff, right? And she basically went and talked to the one main captain, the one that hit him or whatever, and was like, look, you better go to this dude and you better put out. Like, you better do whatever it is you have to do to please him, to make sure his people don't invade, because we can't defend ourselves against all their weapons and stuff like that, right? And basically, without getting too much into it, I mean, I don't want to just go episode by episode explaining what happened. They basically calm the situation down. The Japanese people actually send in like a night raid to go bust him out. And they break in there, knock out all the guards, and they basically kick in the door, waiting to, thinking he's like being tortured and all this kind of sort of stuff. And it turns out when they get there, they're like feeding him food while he's laying in the bed and stuff like that. So his people, his peoples were like super mad at him and butthurt. But you have a lot of comedy in there in between. But the anime, what it's mostly about is just basically the Japanese people establishing their own country in this world, so to speak. And they basically take their forward operating base and they make it like, I forget what they called it, but it's basically like they treat it like it's like mini Japan in this world. And this country and the rest of this world, basically what the anime is about is just them dealing with the Japanese people. Like you have a couple countries who try to attack them over time because they think that they're weak in certain areas, but just the Japanese military is just so strong because we have the advanced technology. We have helicopters, tanks, missiles, and they eventually bring in like planes and they set up like little Air Force type, like a landing pad where they got jets now and we're taking aerial surveillance and stuff like that. Like the only thing that they didn't bring to this other world is like they didn't start launching rockets and satellites. But I'm assuming that's coming. Like I wish this anime would have had a season 2. But it's basically them dealing with all the other countries in this land, and they actually befriend the Queen's town or whatever, because she's like the local leader of that country she's in. And she basically brokers a treaty with them, and they share resources, they share knowledge and things like that. At this forward operating base, they set up like a town where refugees can come and, let's say, live if they don't like, the other countries, because in the other countries, like I said, it's still medieval. So they're like, they have slaves and all that kind of sort of stuff. So they got people to come to their country. They bring in modern conveniences from the modern world to their land, like condoms and stuff like that. They do humanitarian stuff, like they gave out condoms and STD shots to like the prostitutes in this fantasy land, so they didn't get STDs and all this kind of sort of stuff. So it's basically modern versus ancient, is what I'm trying to say. That's like in every facet that you can put it in the anime. Idealisms, ideologies, governments, because the Japanese government, they're a democracy, and then the other governments, they're run by like kings and queens and stuff. So they have a few things involving that where the kings and queens feel obligated and they feel like they're better than their people. And then you have the Japanese people who are like, look, we can clearly see that they're treating their people wrong. We have the technology to go over there and wipe him out. But then you have the question of like, should they do that or not? It's like, where do you draw the line? And that's where you have a lot of issues, because it's not like an action anime. You have action in it, to be sure, but it's like it plays off of different concepts so well, and it's so intellectually done. It's not the greatest out there. I'm not saying that this is the most greatest intellectual anime ever, but it's one of those animes where it touches on a lot of things, YouTube. And it didn't have like there wasn't really like a romantic subplot kind of sort of thing, but it did touch on like various anime genres. Like I mentioned before about harem animes. This isn't a harem anime, but like the main character, he meets like 3 other women and they all gravitate around him for whatever reason. And they basically follow him throughout the whole anime series. So you have a lot of different genres and a lot of different ideas and a lot of topics that they have to go through by being modern, and then you have all the ancient stuff too. And it plays off of each other very well. They have like an ongoing storyline, basically about halfway in. The first half of the anime is basically the Japanese people setting up shop in this world and bringing all the modern day conveniences that go along with that. And then about the other half, you have a lot of well, not really the other half of it, but throughout the whole anime, it glorifies the military in that kind of sort of aspect, where if you guys have ever seen like military documentaries or military films from back in the day where they glorify, the military and what the military can do, this anime has that. And to me, that makes sense. I was reading a lot of reviews online, and people are I guess saying that's a negative. But me, myself, I consider that to be a positive. only because that's what I expect. I mean, if I'm watching a military anime, that's like saying if I watch an American military cartoon or whatever, America's making it, right? So let's say we're making the cartoon. I'm expecting us to glorify our own military. We're not gonna like make the military out to be shit. That's just, it's our own military. That's why if you ever watch like all of those back in the day movies of like America versus Germany in World War II, the German army is always evil as shit, but the American army, they're noble. Like we may do some some evil stuff, but we have a noble, honorable reason behind it. Like the Germans don't have that shit too. You know what I'm saying? When Germany makes the movie, they're seen as the honorable soldiers, whereas we're the bad guys. So that's what I'm saying. By this being a Japanese anime, it's like, okay, I kind of expect that. I mean, the SDF, yeah, the Japanese don't really have a military like that, or an army, but the SDF is like their army, so it's like I'm expecting them to glorify it. And you had a lot of modern day military shots of like actual equipment. They didn't just make up equipment. No, they had like regular tanks, regular helicopters, regular guns, and they had a lot of modern tactics whenever they fought like the military, like whenever they had to come up with strategies on how to take down like because it eventually got to the point where they took over a country. I'm not going to specifically say why because I don't want to, spoil anything. But basically, something jumps off. One of the royal people hatches this plan to go against the Japanese people. They realize they can't fight them directly using like, soldiers and stuff. So they try to fight them indirectly using politics, using bad word and subterfuge to try to make the Japanese people look bad or to kill them or to do whatever. And it eventually comes to a point where, like I said, the Japanese people go and take over this guy's country. And when they do it, they use modern military tactics. You see them post up at doorways, kick open doors, throw in flashbangs, smoke grenades, all the modern stuff that you see in military movies and games and stuff like that, right? And for me, since I'm a fan of that, I like that. I know that's not going to appeal to a lot of people, but if you're into that military kind of sort of stuff, then this will cater to that. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have a whole lot of other military stuff. It didn't get too gruesome, meaning like they didn't bring in like long range sniper rifles, things like that. You didn't see a lot of gore when it comes to missiles, bombs, and bodies exploding up. But they definitely did have the modern, combat, in there. And it definitely mashed together with the tone that they were trying to do. It would be interesting to read like like if they ever came out with like an interview or something like that. I don't know if this is from a manga or not. I mean, I'm guessing it is because most animes are from like either like novels or mangas, things like that. But it would be interesting to read like an interview with like the guy who created it to see like what's the point of this anime, what's the story he's trying to tell. Because I would love to read it to not only, because the concept is nothing new. Modern versus ancient isn't really nothing new. You see it all the time with like time travel movies or like sci-fi, things like that. So the concept is fairly old at this point. But it would be interesting to see what was he trying to tell? What was the point of the anime? But for me personally, I ate it up, YouTube. Whatever he was trying to, sell, I bought 1 million shares of it. I loved it. The animation was on point. It wasn't the greatest animation I've seen, but it wasn't shitty like Dragon Ball Super from back in the day. Back in the day, meaning, I'm saying back in the day, like last year, but it wasn't as bad as Dragon Ball Super's earlier episodes. That's what I'm trying to say. But the animation was good. The music was fairly typical. It wasn't nothing that really like wowed me or stood out. Typical fantasy type stuff. But if you guys are looking for like a just an interesting anime, just the interesting intellectual anime that could be funny, and you have a lot of unorthodox situations that pop up because this anime has tons of them. It's basically really cool to watch. I mean, if you guys are into military stuff, I would definitely recommend it. If you're not, then it's like, okay, it can glorify, military stuff at times. But you can watch it just for the interaction between the modern people versus the ancient fantasy people. So that can always work too. They eventually take out dragons at the end, so that was pretty cool too. So if you're in it for the fantasy stuff, They hop back and forth between worlds every once in a while. I think they do it like maybe twice, maybe 3 times. But for the most part, they're in a fantasy setting. So if you guys, I know every once in a while they come out with an anime where like a modern military battalion or whatever gets stranded in a fantasy world. If you're a fan of that whole genre, definitely watch it. But outside of that, if you're just somebody who just wants to watch new anime and is interested in just seeing something, just completely new, because that's how I went into this. I went into this completely new. I didn't watch any trailers. I just read this, I just read the synopsis and was like, I'll give it a shot. If I like it, I like it. I don't. I ended up loving it. I've recently been doing that with a lot of animes. Recently, I'll go up and just research a topic or research a genre. Find like 5 or 6 animes and I'll just check them out, watch them. I'm learning to do new things now that I'm in my early 30s and everything. So, but anyways, guys, let me cut this video off here because I know we're running into a half hour because I'll be talking for the next hour and a half. But anyway, if you guys want to see more anime videos like this, please do let me know. I don't mind doing them every week or every 2 weeks. I'm leaning towards starting a new channel for my commentary type stuff. I know I do the commentary stuff here every now and then, but I don't get a lot of views on it. Only because I think it's more because this is like a gameplay oriented channel than just me just giving my opinions and everything. So let me know what you guys think about that. I know I've made the other channel yet, but I haven't done anything with it. So if you guys, don't mind going to the other channel, just let me know. I'll put links in the description and all that good stuff. And I'll also put a link to the synopsis to the anime and stuff in there too. But if you guys, want to see me do this a little bit more often, just hit me up in the comments, or if you have animes you want me to do a video on. Let's say you've seen something and I haven't, just throw it down in the comments below. I don't mind checking out something new and just making a video about it, giving my impressions on it. But anyways, my name is Denonu, the man with the biggest and the most blackest privilege on YouTube, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.